Welcome to the Western Voice. I'm Cory Morgan. I spoke this week with Caylan Ford. Now, Caylan was a victim, she truly was, of cancel culture and political character assassination at its worst. I think a lot of people in Alberta might remember her. She was a candidate for a swing riding in Calgary during the provincial election in 2019. And a left wing quote unquote news organization called Press Progress, which is tied to the Broadbent Institute, which is an NDP machine, put out these out of context, terrible quotes that made her out to be a racist and, of course, all of the usual terrible things. The anticipated media storm came about. Caylan ended up stepping away and out of the race mid-race. Her reputation was in tatters. The media turned on her brutally, and even when she managed to get a media interview to at least explain herself and talk about what she'd said and why she'd said it, there was a campaign to shut down that media outlet and that radio host, and the media caved. I mean, you can't find that interview anywhere. So this was brutal, and the chill it puts on discourse, on campaigning, on media, it was just an ugly action at every level. But Caylan is pushing back. She's taking some legal action against those who did this to her, and she's certainly still outspoken and still bright. And as you'll be able to see in this interview, like, this is a person who's really going to be going places, and she's not going to let them ruin her career and her voice going forward. It was great talking with her and seeing that she's still got such a positive attitude after this wretched treatment she endured. All right, well, thank you very much for joining me, Caylan. I hope you're doing well in this challenging times here with the COVID nightmare that we're all enduring.
You as well, Cory. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, no problem. So, I mean, among other challenges, you've been just a victim of a terrible smear job with political motivation, personal motivation. Basically, the media turned its back on you, wouldn't even let you defend yourself. Can you, I guess, just kind of in a nutshell, lay out what happened? You were running in Mountain View for the UCP, and that's a riding in Calgary. It's kind of a hotly contested one. It's a real swing riding, so it was an important one. You'd been considered a star candidate. I mean, you've got great qualifications. You're intelligent. You're well spoken. You're on the, in my view, sort of progressive side of the conservative end of things. Yet things sort of went awry. Maybe if you could lay out a little bit of that for us.
Sure. Right. So I was running in the 2019 provincial election in Alberta, and I was a candidate for the United Conservative Party, running in, as you said, what was a swing riding in sort of urban Calgary against the NDP's Justice Minister. And I'd been campaigning for about 8 or 9 months. We had tremendous momentum behind us. And then a month before the election, less than a month actually, Press Progress, which is I don't know how you would describe it. I tend to characterize it as
words for Duncan and Press Progress.
sort of, I don't know, purveyor of agitprop, but it's basically the sort of de facto media arm and opposition research mill for the NDP. And they published a story claiming that in a private conversation years before with an anonymous source, that I had echoed white nationalist rhetoric and complained that white supremacist terrorists are treated unfairly, was, I think, their headline. And this is a gross mischaracterization. Basically, they'd obtained a couple sentences of what had been a much longer academic discussion in which I was actually talking about how to reduce the risk of far-right radicalization. This is an area that I have some professional and academic interest in. I worked in international security fields. I'd done a master's degree in international security studies. I studied counterterrorism. And at the time of the conversation, I was living in Europe at the time of the sort of migrant crisis, studying refugee and asylum law. So they took a couple sentences out of this conversation, edited them and redacted them deceptively, and put them in a new context so as to impute to me ideas that I've never held, and try to conflate me with basically the shooter in the Christchurch mosque massacre, which had occurred only 3 days earlier. I didn't have the record of these conversations myself. So I was sort of in an impossible position because I could have, if I had the records, I would have been able to just publish them and show people, here's the actual context, here's what I actually said, here's how they changed it or altered my words. But I didn't have the opportunity to do that. And my accuser has also since apparently destroyed the records of these conversations. So it was, within an hour of publication, the NDP then publishes a press release saying, why is Caylan Ford on the ballot? And basically insinuating that I'm not morally fit to run for office. And almost immediately, a number of members of the media sort of quite credulously picked up on this narrative, and it just became a media storm, and obviously on social media as well. And so this is, the eve of the writ drop, and political parties tend to be extremely reactive and very anxious, and they can't really risk losing media cycles during an election to trying to defend or explain a story like this. And so I had to, I was in a position where I had to resign my candidacy. And it sort of continued for weeks thereafter. It continues to this day. I'm still routinely attacked on social media on the basis of these accusations. And when I would try speaking to journalists, a lot of journalists and columnists and editors at Canadian publications who I knew told me that they recognized that this narrative was false, and yet they felt that they were basically afraid of saying so. They were afraid of any potential blowback. When I did do one radio interview about 2 weeks out to explain what had happened and explain what I actually believe, I was on Danielle Smith's show. She's a popular radio host and former politician in Alberta. And NDP surrogates launched a petition to try to drive her off the air or force her to apologize or something, and threatened to target her advertisers. The mayor of the city of Mayor Nenshi apparently got on board with that and called for people to boycott her show for giving me an opportunity to defend myself against false accusations that I was a white supremacist, basically.
Yeah, and in the end, you ended up losing your campaign. You had to step aside, and I saw that actually as, you knew you were being wrong, but it was distracting from the whole. You took the hit from the team so terribly unfairly. So the Post Millennial did a deep dive on that back in April, because there's so much to read when you look at the communications and what had happened, and it's just wretched. But some of the stuff, even with what Press Progress put out, you can see some of the quotes. You referred to white supremacists as having perverse moral reasoning. You called them odious. As you said, any academic discussion, you're going to have a lot of text, a lot of comments, and anybody can go in and clip out chunks and make it look horrific. And we see it happen so often. So what was just so maddening and frightening, the example that's happened, is they also took away your platform and your ability to at least explain and defend yourself. And that's really distressing. It was poor practice on the part of media. It was poor practice on the part of people. As you said, Danielle Smith gave you a chance to explain at length, and I respect Danielle. And you gave a good interview to talk about what happened, and then they come down on her. I've noticed the only place I can find that interview is where you've posted it on YouTube. They've pulled it down everywhere else. Such cowardice on the part of media these days, that they, their role is supposed to be allowed discourse and expand on these sorts of things. And they stole that from you. They didn't give you the ability to at least explain yourself. And it's just, it was terribly unfair, but it's also set an awful precedent. And we've seen it in so many other situations. Have you had anybody from the media at least apologize or get back to you on this? Or has there been follow-up, or have they just kind of disappeared?
There are a number of people with different outlets who have tried writing this story, and for one reason or another, it just hasn't really materialized until very recently, when a friend published an article in the National Post almost 2 years after the fact now, saying, wait a second, what happened here was an injustice, and this should give us all pause. But yeah, there is, there is, when we talk about kind of trials by media or trials by social media, in a way it's a misnomer, right? Because even though the consequences on your life can be catastrophic, I mean, you can sort of render people basically unemployable and bereft and socially ostracize them almost permanently, and kind of destroy in an instant a reputation that and a career that may have been built over decades. But there's no due process. When an accusation is made, there's no presumption of innocence. It's a rush to judgment. There are no rules of evidence, right? I mean, no one's allowed to has actually been allowed to independently scrutinize the documents that formed the basis for the accusations against me, including myself. And there's no proportionality in the punishments that are meted out either. So even when a person maybe has erred, and made they've sort of violated some kind of social norm or something, the consequences just bear no objective relationship to the severity of the actual or the putative offense. So they're wildly disproportionate. And yeah, it certainly it brings out. There's also no kind of a court of law. There's a principle of legality, right? You need to know that something is a crime in order to commit it. There can be no punishment without law, is the idea. And you find that the norms around what you can and can't say, what ideas you can and cannot subject to philosophical inquiry, what words you can and can't use, is totally mutable. It's ever changing. You never know where the lines are. It's the rules, such as they are inconsistently applied. And that creates an atmosphere of terror. I think there's a lot of people are very afraid of, because they don't know what the rules are. They don't know when they would potentially be found in violation of them for speaking their mind or for asking a question.
Yeah, well, we have so many serious social issues all around the world going on right now. Like, we need in-depth discussion. We need awkward discussion. We need challenging discussion, whether it is racial issues. I mean, the Black Lives Matter explosion in North America. I mean, I'm not a fan of that particular group, but obviously with that much stress and protest, something's going on. We have to look into why there is so much discord. But again, when people are afraid to discuss it, because again, I mean, that then you're going to be going into some of those issues. You're going to be talking about race issues. You're going to be talking about discrimination, and somebody can rip into that for political objectives and ruin you. Then people, well, will shy away. It gives a chilling thing, and then of course you get farther from the solution. It's doing damage all around. That was something else that came out with this. I mean, press progress. The blatant political motivation. I mean, they had some of these quotes that they were going to use that they took out of context, and they waited until into the political campaign to put it out. I mean, if these were some social justice warriors who just felt you were such a person that it had to be exposed and sidelined, they would have done it immediately. But no, they did.
It seems as though they had this for at least 2 months before publishing it.
Yeah.
So waiting for a sort of the most politically opportune and most politically damaging time, expecting, I think, that this would be the result and intending for this to be the result.
Yeah, well, and so you are young. I mean, the internet's forever. That's that painful thing to look at. But you're working to correct the record. As you said, there are no rules and so forth in the court of social justice, and
there's generally no authority to whom you can appeal if you've been wrongly convicted in a court of public opinion. Right?
Yeah, but you have moved on to the actual courts with some degree, with some litigation against those to, I guess, well, clear your name and perhaps send a warning shot to people not to impugn people like they had. Can you expand a little bit on what your action's about there?
Yeah, so I hesitated for a long time with whether I would pursue legal action, and ultimately, I decided that I should, because just as the kind of the proponents of cancel culture and of these tactics, they'll often say there's no such thing as cancel culture. It's just consequences. It's just about holding people accountable. And they often imagine that they're holding powerful people accountable for what I'm sure they believe are abhorrent violations. Of course, that's not actually what it's about. And my case, I think, is a very clear demonstration of that. I wasn't a powerful person. The people attacking me were. It included the premier of the province and the mayor of my city and well-financed political action committees. I was just a candidate, and candidates are, maybe people imagine that they're in proximity to power, but they certainly don't wield it. Um, and whatever, again, the consequences were, I was having a sort of an open-minded dialectical academic conversation about how to reduce radicalization and understand socially complex issues. And I'm open to the idea that I may have somehow been at fault there, but no one has yet been able to explain to me where I was actually morally wrong. And so these are, I think, consequences for, at worst, is maybe an excess of curiosity about social issues and in trying to understand other people's perspectives. So for all the talk about consequences, the fact is that in this environment of cancel culture where this has been normalized, you can wield career and potentially life-destroying accusations against someone with total impunity. And if you wield those accusations frivolously or dishonestly for your own advantage, you can do it anonymously, as my accusers were, and you'll never suffer any consequences. But the damage it does to the individual targets is obviously immense. And more than that, I think it does profound damage to our democracy and to our social life. It destroys, as you alluded to, when people are afraid of exploring ideas honestly and following evidence, it destroys your capacity for sort of discursive democracy and for deliberation, for free inquiry, and for seeking the truth. It makes people afraid of each other if they constantly have to be looking over their shoulder and wondering if the person they're talking to is an informant who's secretly recording them and will go to the media and try to destroy them. And the media, in this case, enabled that kind of culture. And so it erodes sort of openness and social trust and certainly privacy, which is, I think, a necessary prerequisite to living in a free society. So it just does tremendous damage to our social fabric. I happen to think that trust is one of the great invisible goods that binds our society together. And when you undermine that, and when you start changing the meaning of words so that people can no longer orient themselves, you can do no greater harm, I think, to the social fabric. And so my view finally was there have to be consequences for that. And if through this lawsuit it can serve as something of a deterrent against those parties, not just Press Progress and the NDP, but also the CBC and the Toronto Star are among the defendants, maybe they will think twice before wielding these kinds of accusations so callously in the future.
Yes, and I really hope you have success with that. We're in a period of media transition, and the alternative media is coming to the fore, with organizations such as Press Progress is one of them, and it is the Post Millennial. But they're evolving, and there is it's double-edged. I love what the new media is bringing out, and it's bringing in discourse. We're not afraid to talk about these things. We'll go into them, but at the same time, we don't have those levels of controls necessarily, or some of them, again, it can be more inclined to be spreading, well, to be blunt, BS. When we see some consequences and accountability come down on them, hopefully it'll improve the media as a whole. So social media and new media to realize you can't do these things to people with impunity. It just can't happen. It's, well, I guess it shouldn't be that surprising to see it out of the Star and the CBC, but still, those are major outlets. They should have known better, but they got in on the swarm. But the new media coming along, at least, also won't be as inclined to steal the platform for somebody to expand on it. And that was just something that was so tragic. You couldn't, they were terrified of you. They, even ones that perhaps felt sympathetic or wanted to give you more time, but I'm sure their editors saying, no, we're just not going to go there. And, look what happened to QR77. They attacked their sponsors, and it's just so wrong and so bad for discourse all around. But
so credit to the Post Millennial, because it was the only publication that actually looked into what the backstory was here and did a deep dive into who my anonymous accuser was and what was actually motivating him. And to its immense credit, was not intimidated by sort of spurious legal threats against them. So, and they stood their ground. So they deserve quite a lot of credit for that, I think.
Yeah, and I can't encourage enough, and I'll encourage again to hit go to that. It'll be in the article below this on a political hit job within Post Millennial. It was also Howard Anglin who wrote in the National Post recently. So it was good to see it come up again. I guess, you don't want to relive this, but I don't want to see this story die or go away. You need to get your fair shake in this. As I said, you're young, you're smart, you got ambition going here. So let's get the media on the record that no, you were wronged, and you can move ahead with whatever your career plans may be. So that's where I'm really hoping that your legal actions and just more time and discourse and better media helps solve things, fix this mess for you and prevent more of it in the future. Because I'm looking forward to, again, good, intelligent discourse on sticky issues. We need it. And I don't want people like you or anybody else to be afraid to talk to these things. We have to. We're not going to get solutions if we don't talk about them. So where could we find more information or keep up with what you're up to these days?
Well, I'm somewhat active on Twitter, so you can follow me on Twitter at Caylan Ford is my handle, or my website, which is just caylanford.com. And I'll post there occasionally and try to keep up to date to the extent that my lawyer allows me to. There's a section there on litigation that answers some of the common questions that I've received.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming out to talk to me. And I really look forward to hearing and perhaps speaking to you again in the future. Again, so sorry all this has happened, but I think you're on the right track to, you're not backing down and cowering away. You're pushing back. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure talking with you this morning.
All right. Thanks, Caylan.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. It is nice to see somebody like Caylan at least, standing up and saying, hey, I'm going to move forward with my future and not let this keep me canceled for life. Because that really does seem to be the intent of these, I would almost call them evil people that would completely shred a person's character on what are clearly, fabricated out of context comments just to make for a better political future for their party of choice. Just an ugly affair, and it's far from unique. So Caylan's pushing back. She's going to move ahead. She's clearing the record for herself. This also drives home, this ongoing issue on the importance of alternative media, such as the Post Millennial. We're not going to be pushed around as other media outlets were with Caylan, who wouldn't even carry her story, wouldn't let her defend herself or speak for herself. So again, as we've referenced, there's a story in the Post Millennial from a couple of years ago, but it really gives the details of this whole hit job, and that's what it's called, a political hit job in the name of progress, how UCP candidate Caylan Ford fell from grace. And it goes into the messaging between her and that odious character who apparently just had a sick obsession with her, who shared those out of context things with, again, that unprincipled group with Press Progress. So give that a look. And be sure to subscribe to the Post Millennial, support the alternative media so we can keep, speaking to these issues and speaking to people that the mainstream media is too cowardly to touch, because it's just so important that we keep this discourse going, we keep communication open, and that speech is truly free and we can speak at length to defend ourselves at the times when we need it, because Caylan was robbed of that right in the past, and we shouldn't let this keep happening going forward. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.